I believe there's a direct connection between the Zionists and the Nazis, clearly, the Italian fascists, and even going and through the Prussian state. Do we have time to go
Yeah,
go
yeah,
into?
no, I'm looking at the comments here because I'm seeing a lot of people really interested in what you're saying. So I was just looking at my comments. So no, please do.
Okay, so we all know that there was a period, the Crusades, when ambitious, greedy European guys would put together armies and go to the Middle East and steal stuff.
Yeah.
It was basically the plan, right? How things have not changed, in all these centuries. And so one of the groups that went out there was a group called the Teutonic Knights, and they were German knights. Um, and they failed miserably. They didn't succeed. So they came back to, we call it Germany, but they didn't call it that then. It was just this region. So
Yeah.
they came back to Germany with their tails between their legs, thinking, now what do we do? And they looked around in Poland and Lithuania, and this will become important a little bit later. And they saw all these pagans because, Europe wasn't 100% Catholic, and until a while. It took a while to do that, and so
Yeah.
they went to the church and said, "Hey, church, if we make an effort to convert these people to Catholicism, can we steal their land?" And the Pope said, "Yeah, good plan." So they went in and they took over what's now Poland, parts of Lithuania, and and because they weren't welcome, they established by necessity a garrison state.
Mm.
Because you go in, you steal people's land, you murder them, you abuse them. You're not going to be popular, so you have to create this garrison.
And define it just for people that might not know what the word garrison
Well,
state means.
garrison like a fort,
Yeah.
like a fort or a military base. So in other words, you live inside the fort, and you only go out a little bit, and the key word is militarized.
Yep.
So this group of people who evolved into what's called the Prussians. People may have seen with the funny hats and the things sticking out, and they're marching around and all that. Those are the Prussians. That was an intensely militarized society for centuries by
Mm.
necessity, and they were always fighting with their neighbors. Sound familiar? And their neighbors were, trying to get back at them. And this was the Prussian state. Well, where did and this became a model. Some people looked at it and admired the Prussian state. There were elements in the United States that really admired the Prussians.
Mm.
The Rockefellers, for example. In fact, a lot of what our modern world is really a fusion of the Rockefeller mentality with the Prussian mentality. They
Interesting.
they had a lot of partnerships, industrial partnerships, scientific partnerships, and when the Prussians passed the torch to the Nazis, the Rockefellers were there assisting the Nazis in various ways before, during, and after the war.
Interesting.
Rockefeller agents, their attorneys and so on and so forth. The other group that was very inspired by the Prussians were the Italian fascists. They loved this marching around and this, we're going to militarize society. Everybody's going to be a soldier. Everybody's going to be militant. We're going to we're going to try to capture land. We're going to, so that those Teutonic Knights morphed into the Prussians. They inspired some Americans very strongly. They inspired Italian fascism. Now think about this. Where did militant Zionism grow up? Well, it grew up in Germany, obviously, but also a lot of the founders of Zionism were from where? Lithuania and Poland.
Yeah.
Those
Eastern Europe.
people grew up, think about this, those people grew up, whether they were Jewish or not Jewish, or Zionists or not Zionists, from the womb all the way into their adulthood, they were living in this intensely militarized garrison style state.
It's all they
That's
knew.
pardon me. Yeah,
It's
go
all
ahead.
they knew.
That was normality to them. This is how you run a state. You kick people around. You regiment everybody, and then you bully everybody that you think is inferior to you. So there's so many things that fed into Zionism. Um, Italian fascism, and we should talk about that if we have the time, because
Yeah.
that's a very key element that very few people talk about. But the Prussian mentality and the Italian fascist mentality are at the absolute core of these current Zionists.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the Italians, the Italian fascists. Um, first of all, the founder of fascism, and he named it. He's the guy that gave the name to fascism. Is Benito Mussolini, and he was already in power in 1922.
And let's
And
define, because we hear the word fascist being thrown around so abundantly now. Let's really define what fascism is for people, for people that hear the word that might not actually understand it, because we keep hearing terms. This person's a fascist. This person's a
yeah,
fascist. So what's it really mean? And then also the kind of the geopolitical angle of how fascism actually exerts itself.
well, what it meant in practice in Italy, and we'll start with Italy because that's where it was founded, was a super powerful state. I mean, we actually, if you don't mind, to tell the full story, we have to take a step back to the late 19th century when this thing called nationalism was becoming a big deal. I'm an Italian, or I'm a German, or I'm a Brit. Um, the Italian nationalists, Italy was just a lot of little principalities. It was just a lot of little tiny states. It didn't become Italy until the late-ish 19th century. And the people that pulled that off were quite brutal, and they were very brutal against the southern Italians.
Mm.
And things got so bad in Sicily and southern Italy. There was a famous American writer, Booker T. Washington, a freed a black American slave, and he was a writer and a thinker, and he visited southern Italy in that period, and he said he'd never seen people so poor in his life, including slavery in the United States, and he'd experienced it firsthand.
Well,
They completely, the Northerners, the nationalists, completely raped and pillaged, and it was horrible. There was a huge sulfur mine in uh, Sicily, which you may say, well, it's just, who cares? Well, sulfur is very important for gunpowder.
mm.
Right? You can't be a warrior in the modern world unless you have access to a lot of sulfur. And so, literally, the life of the Southern Italians was they were so poor they would have to rent their boys, children, to the sulfur miners just so they could feed the rest of the family. And a lot of those kids never made it back. So anyway, there's a tradition of extreme brutality in Italy. So anyway, but and by the way, the early Zionists of the late 19th century and early 20th century admired that.
Yeah.
They openly admired the brutality of the nationalist Italians against the Southern Italians, because there's the racist element in Zionism is baked in the cake from day one.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, at this point, I went to the West Bank back in 2022. I'll probably never be allowed to go back until something changes. But I mean, there all the Jewish settlements, all the Israeli settlements are in the hilltops. The Palestinians are all in the valleys. So they're not just looking down at you psychologically, but they're looking down at you physically the whole time. It feels like something even beyond racism. Like it's almost as if they don't view you as human. And it's important that they view you that way in order to carry out mass atrocities against you. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do so.
Correct. Correct.
Uh,
And it goes back to the garrison state, right? The fort, they're up on the hill, which is the better strategic position,
yep.
and easier to defend, easier to launch attacks. So one of the things that the fascists did, and this connects directly to James Angleton and connects directly to mid 20th, early 20th century Zionism. It's a direct connection. One of the things that Mussolini did was, of course, he attacked Libya and he attacked Ethiopia, and they killed at least 300,000 people in Ethiopia.
Mm.
And it was the first example of aerial chemical warfare bombing in history. I mean, a lot of the very first bombing of civilians, and I have to say civilians, these weren't military operations. These were direct attacks on civilians using aerial weapons. That was pioneered by the Italian fascists.
Mm.
Now, here's the key. At the very same time, and by the way, the Germans, the German idea was we're going to take Eastern Europe and Russia. That's going to be ours. The Italian idea is we're going to take the Eastern Mediterranean.
Mm.
They didn't succeed at it, but they wanted to do the very same thing that the Nazis attempted in Eastern Europe. The Italians wanted to do in all of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, so on. So. At the very same time that the fascists were the Italian fascism means here's the government. So here's my hand. Here's the government, and here's our select industrial partners.
Yep.
We're going to operate as one unit, and we're going to regiment society. We're going to tell women how they have to behave, children how they have to behave. It's going to be very, very strict.
Yep.
The state will control every breath you take, and you will have total allegiance to this corporate government fascist state. And then we're going to go out and steal everybody else's stuff. This is their model of humanity, right? So at the very same time that the fascists were murdering people in Africa and in North Africa, James Angleton's father was in either Milan or Rome, probably Rome. And he was a major industrialist in the United States. There was a thing called the National Cash Register Corporation. Now we
Mm.
think, well, cash register, that's primitive. No, you have to remember there were no computers. There were no personal computers. People used to do business with a drawer full of cash, and they'd write things out and they'd hand it to you. So the cash register was a high-tech instrument. He was a super successful executive with National Cash Register, and they gave him the franchise for Europe, operating out of Rome. I believe it was, I'm pretty sure it was Rome.
Mm.
So you're not going to be able to run a large corporation in Italy while a fascist is running the government unless you're a fascist yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's just not going to happen. So young James, there would have been people streaming through the house for dinner parties and social gatherings who were hardcore fascists. So he grew up in a fascist, a heavily indoctrinated fascist environment.
Mm.
Um, and let's see, there's another element. Well, anyway, that says a lot right there. Another element of fascism, and the reason the Rockefellers, who were the richest people in America by far, far richer than Bill Gates and all these guys relatively, they controlled so much. The reason that the Rockefellers poured money into fascist Italy and helped fascist Italy so much was they hated communism.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. They didn't they didn't want anybody to ask questions about where they were getting their money and how they were abusing industrial workers. Um, so they hated communism. So Angleton would have grown up hating communism.
Very anti-communist,
Yeah.
very almost to the point where he became neurotic because of it.
Yeah. Oh, I think he was. I think he lost his mind over it
Yeah,
eventually. Um,
absolutely. And this hatred of communism also adds an understanding of why he felt like he needed to be as close as possible to the Israelis, because the Israelis were importing a lot of Soviet Jews. And
correct.
he wanted to make sure that he had the in into that life. He wanted to make sure he had operatives. So he felt that by being close to Israel, he would get an upper hand when it came to the Soviets.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And, so we look at where we are today, and it seems like the United States and Israel are one at this point. It really
Oh
seems
yeah.
like you can't separate it. I always tell Arabs, other Arabs, I'm Palestinian, and I think it's really important for Arabs to know that this was never the case. It wasn't always like this, and there was actually administrations that actually sought to have good relationships with the Arab world, uh, which nowadays it feels like everything is imposed on them. And when it comes to Americans, we say Israel is our greatest ally. The only reason we say that is because every one of our politicians is bought out to say that.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. It's so we're living in a world of total unreality.
Yeah.
And that's why the Zionists are so concerned with and spend so much money and effort on propagandizing, because that's the base of their survival, imposing unreality on Americans.
Yep.
Uh, in fact, I want to go on. So I think I've covered. So you can see that Angleton and fascism and Zionism were linked. He was part of the OSS, which was the forerunner to the CIA,
Yep.
and so because he spoke fluent Italian and was very connected in the Italian society, they made him the station chief in Italy. And so after World War II, that was the very first CIA operation in World War II, was to suppress the communist and socialist political parties that had great popularity in Italy, because it was the communists and socialists that were fighting the Nazis the most effectively during World War II. In fact, it was socialist and communist fighters that actually liberated huge parts of Italy before the Americans even showed up.
Yeah.
You know, and if you go to northern Italy, you'll still see there's still a strong socialist bent there. Um, so see, I'm losing my train of thought, but he was there. He was in. So he was part of that operation to undermine the Italian political culture.
Well, and he was also basically creating an underground railroad in a way to help Jews escape Nazi Germany as well. That was a big core aspect of his identity in the 1920s, and to escape just kind of brutality and anti-Semitism in Europe. So there was a core, there was a core. He truly wanted to help Jewish people on top of wanting info on the Soviets. It was really just an entire identity for him.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, if he, I wasn't aware that he was involved in helping Jewish people escape
Yeah,
Nazism.
Escape Europe. I'll send you the article. It's from I think the article was called the Israel Files. It was in the
Oh,
same article that mentioned how Angleton also really secretly made the Israel file at the CIA a very like separate file. I'll send you the source for that. But he was basically creating an underground railroad in a way to help Jews flee persecution in Europe.
well, you know, the other people he was helping after World War II is he was helping fascists and Nazis escape.